Breaking surface. Mateo Vega was the only person on the research pier when Hurricane Idalia made her second, unforecast landfall, which meant he was also the only person I had to physically drag off it. My name is Jordan Ellis. I'm a 24-year-old Marine Rescue Coordinator for Biscayne Bay, which is a job that sounds romantic until a Category 3 decides to stall directly over your jurisdiction, and you find yourself driving a rescue Zodiac through 9-foot chop at 2 in the morning, looking for a marine biologist who filed a research permit for that exact pier 6 hours before the evacuation order hit. I want to be honest about what I was feeling when I found him. It wasn't admiration. It was the specific fury of someone who has pulled 2 bodies out of a bay this year and is not interested in a third. He was crouched over a set of water sensors bolted to the pier's end railing, soaked through, headlamp on, downloading data off equipment that cost more than my truck, while a surge wave climbed the pilings 8 feet below him, and rain came in sideways hard enough that it was less weather and more argument. When I hit the pier at a run, the whole structure shuddering under my feet in a way structures aren't supposed to shudder, and grabbed his shoulder, he looked up at me with the expression of a man being interrupted mid-sentence. Not frightened, not apologetic, just genuinely surprised that the hurricane was apparently serious enough to warrant a home visit. "I need 4 more minutes," he said, like that was a sentence that meant something in the current wind speed. "You have 30 seconds, I said. "Then I carry you?" That was the moment I should have clocked that this was going to be the most complicated night of my life. Mateo was 23, built lean and rangy in the way that comes from spending 3 years diving research transects rather than lifting in a gym. Warm brown skin and dark hair plastered flat by rain, the kind of jaw that looked like it made decisions and stuck with them. He was also, it became immediately clear, the kind of person who treats this research is irreplaceable, as a full counter-argument to the pier is about to leave its pilings. "The temperature gradient data doesn't upload remotely," he said, still not moving. "If I leave without it, 18 months of reef migration tracking is gone. The sensors go underwater in the surge, the drive corrupts, and the reef restoration project loses its baseline. I am not a marine biologist. I know enough about Biscayne Bay to know that 18 months of reef data matters. I've pulled dead coral off those restoration sites myself after previous storm events, hauled tangled monitoring equipment out of surge debris on 3 separate occasions for researchers who didn't have the boat skills to get in there themselves, and I know enough about Category 3 wind speeds to know that the pier we were standing on had a structural rating we were about to exceed probably sometime in the next 6 to 8 minutes. "How long does the upload actually take?" I asked, which was either the right call or the beginning of the worst decision I'd ever make on a shift. My captain would later describe it as creative situational judgment. I don't think that was entirely a compliment. 90 seconds if the signal holds. I looked at the surge. I looked at the sky. I did the kind of math you do when you're standing on a structure that's vibrating slightly in a way structures aren't supposed to vibrate. 60, I said. "I'll time it." He was already back at the sensor. But that wasn't even the part that scared me. The upload took 83 seconds. The pier held. We ran? Actually ran, Mateo clutching a waterproof hard drive to his chest like it was something alive, and made it to the Zodiac with a wave breaking over the railing behind us close enough that I felt the spray hit the back of my neck as I hit the throttle. That should have been the end of the crisis. It was not. Half a mile from the marina, the Zodiac's engine ate a piece of storm debris. Couldn't tell what. Plastic sheeting, net fragment, something, and the impeller seized with a noise like a brief argument, and then silence. Total, immediate silence, which on open bay water in 30-knot wind is the loudest thing you'll ever hear. We were drifting northeast toward the MacArthur Causeway's bridge pilings at a speed the anchor alone wasn't going to beat. I ran through the options in the 3 seconds it took to confirm the engine wasn't coming back. Radio was already out, took spray earlier, died quietly, and I hadn't told dispatch yet because I'd been planning to fix it once we were safe. Flares were in the dry bag. The Coast Guard was already working 3 other calls on this storm. And between us and those pilings was about 300 yards of angry bay water that had been trying to take things since midnight. I want to be clear that I did not panic. I was, however, extremely focused. Can you swim? I asked Mateo, already reaching for the emergency anchor to try to buy us time. I'm a marine biologist. I've been diving since I was 9. Can you swim in this? A pause. Wind trying to strip the words out of both our mouths. How far to the nearest fixed point? I pointed at the causeway support piling about 80 yards upwind. In a calm bay, nothing. In this bay, tonight, a meaningful conversation about what we were both willing to do. Together, I said, or we ride it out with the anchor and hope the piling wins. He looked at the piling. He looked at the anchor. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read in the dark and the rain, and then he pulled off his outer layer, tucked the hard drive inside the sealed emergency bag I handed him without being asked, and said, "Together then. You lead, I'll match your pace." I don't usually cry on shift. I came close right then for reasons I didn't fully understand until much later. We made the piling. It was not elegant. It involved a lot of swallowed bay water, 3 minutes of fighting a current that kept trying to redirect us toward the causeway's shadow, and a cut on Mateo's arm from barnacles on the piling that he didn't mention until we were safe, and I noticed the blood mixing with the rain on his forearm. The whole swim, I kept one eye on him, expecting him to flag, expecting the ocean he'd spent 3 years studying to finally turn on him the way it turns on everyone eventually. And he didn't flag, not once, setting a pace across that 80 yards that I had to actually push, to match, which is not something I say easily. We tied off to the piling with the Zodiac's bow line and waited. 37 minutes, both of us clinging to the same anchor point, the storm working steadily at our grip, the Zodiac banging against the concrete below us, until a Coast Guard, rigid inflatable, finally found us with a spotlight that hit us both in the face so hard I nearly lost my hold out of pure reflex. They put us in the same dry room at the marina station, which is how I ended up sitting across from Mateo Vega for the first time in. Dry clothes, a Coast Guard emergency blanket around both our shoulders because there was only one left, watching him check the data on his hard drive with the focused intensity of a man who had just risked his life for something and needed to confirm it had been worth it. Did it save? I asked. All of it. He looked up. His eyes, which I hadn't really seen before in the dark and the emergency headlamp, were very dark and very direct, and they did something to my chest that the adrenaline crash hadn't managed on its own. Thank you for the 60 seconds. It was 83. I know, you still gave them to me. I should describe myself here, since I tend to become the invisible one in my own stories. I'm black, 24, built like someone who pulls people out of water for a living, which I am, with my mother's cheekbones and my grandfather's habit of going very still right before I make a decision I'm going to have to live with. I had been doing this job for 2 years at that point, and I had never, not once, given anyone 30 extra seconds on an evacuated pier. I wasn't sure yet what that meant about me or about him. You don't usually stay for the data, I said, mostly to fill the silence, mostly because his shoulder was against mine inside that emergency blanket, and neither of us had moved. I don't usually have data this important. He turned the hard drive over in his hands. The reef restoration project I'm working on, the baseline we saved tonight is the only record of the reef's state before 2 consecutive storm seasons hit it. Without it, we're guessing whether the intervention is working. With it, we can prove it. That's the difference between funding and no funding, between the project continuing or ending. So the 18 months was actually more than just data. It's 3 years of reef recovery on the line. The storm hits, the corals die, we don't know if they're dying because of the intervention or in spite of it. He looked at the drive like it still surprised him that it existed. My brother died diving when I was 17. A preventable accident, wrong equipment, someone not checking twice. I became a marine biologist partly because I needed the ocean to be something I understood well enough to not be afraid of anymore. Tonight I came very close to making his exact mistake, choosing the mission over the margin. I didn't say I'm sorry. I'd learned a long time ago that some grief doesn't want comfort, it wants the quiet that means you actually heard it. I let a full second pass before I gave him something real back. My first week on this job, I pulled a man out of the bay who'd stayed behind in his house to board up windows. He made it. Most of them make it. But every time I run a rescue in conditions like tonight, I think about the one time I might be too late, and what I'll carry out of that water if I am. I stay in this job because someone has to be willing to go in, and because I grew up on this bay and I know it well enough to find the seam between dangerous and survivable. Tonight that seam was 60 seconds on a pier. I'd make the same call again. You gave me 83. I know, don't make me regret it. He almost smiled, which on a face still damp from the bay, under fluorescent station lighting at 3 in the morning, looked like the most genuine thing I'd seen in a long time. Mateo looked at me for a long moment. Are you seeing anyone? He asked, out of nowhere, the way people ask things at 3 in the morning after shared catastrophe, when the ordinary reasons for keeping things back have all washed out to sea. I laughed, which surprised both of us. I work nights, weekends, and every major storm event. I genuinely cannot remember the last date I went on that wasn't also a weather briefing. That's not a no. That's not a no, I agreed. The kiss happened at sunrise. Not dramatic, not at the height of anything, just quiet. At the marina's end dock while the storm finally broke and the bay came back to itself one wave at a time. The water going from black to gray to the particular green-blue of early morning that I've been waking up early to see since I was 8 years old. We'd been awake all night, and we were both still damp, and the station coffee was terrible, and neither of us had figured out yet what you say to someone after a night like that. He solved the problem by not saying anything, just turning toward me in the gray-pink light, hands in his jacket pockets, and waiting with the patience of someone who has spent 3 years watching coral grow a millimeter at a time to see what I'd do about it. I didn't make him wait long. His mouth was warm despite everything, which was the most surprising thing about the whole improbable night, and when I finally pulled back enough to look at him, he had the expression I'd later come to think of as his research face, like he'd just confirmed a hypothesis he'd been holding quietly for hours and was too careful to say out loud before the data was in. He came back to the pier 3 weeks later, on a calm morning that looked nothing like the night we'd met, to reinstall the sensors the storm had taken. I happened to be running a routine patrol of the same channel. We happened to end up on the same dock for lunch, eating sandwiches and watching pelicans work the shallows. We happened to keep ending up in the same places after that, with less and less pretense about it being accidental, until the pretense ran out completely sometime in early September, and neither of us bothered to replace it. By the end of summer, the Reef Restoration Project had a new research partner on its navigation and site access documentation, a marine rescue coordinator who knew the bay's currents better than any chart, and who could get a research zodiac to a transect site 20 minutes faster than the university's contracted boat. The first co-authored paper had both our names on it, not because I did the science, but because, as Mateo put it in the acknowledgments, J. Ellis identified 3 previously undocumented thermal refugia sites during active storm season patrols, which is the scientific way of saying I pointed at things while driving a boat, and he got excited about them, and then wrote it up properly while I made coffee. His mother cried when she met me, which he'd warned me about, and which still caught me completely off guard. She held both my hands and told me in rapid Spanish that she'd been lighting candles at St. Francis every storm season for 6 years, waiting for someone to find her son in that water before the water found him first. My own mother, when I brought Mateo home to the house I grew up in 3 blocks from the bay, took one look at him and said only, "He's got the same look you get when you're out on the water at sunrise." Like he's looking for something he already knows how to find. She's been right about most things for 47 years. She was right about this too. There's a fixed underwater camera on the reef restoration site, motion activated, meant to track fish return patterns after the intervention, and a few weeks ago it caught something on the surface directly above it. 2 men on a research float, one of them kneeling, one of them dropping a water sample kit into the bay with a clatter nobody would ever bother to catalog, because the only thing anyone will ever want to see in that frame is the way. The answer came before the question finished. The timestamp reads 07-23-14. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. Underwater research camera footage. Looking upward through clear Biscayne Bay water toward the surface, automatic timestamp burned into the corner. 07-23-14. Soft morning light filtering down. Through the water's surface, the silhouette of Mateo kneeling on the research float, ring box open, looking at Jordan. Jordan's hand already reaching, water sample kit already forgotten, sinking past the camera in the background. The reef they worked to save, visible in the foreground, more coral than there was 2 storm seasons ago. Grainy, time-stamped, looking up, exactly what a camera built to count fish was never supposed to catch. OUTRONOTU, and Latiti Cecile, Kapanishta Okonakak. If you made it here, thank you. We're a small channel, and every single subscriber gets us one story closer to being able to make more of these. If Jordan and Mateo's story moved you, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling us which pairing you want next, and share this with one person who'd love a slow burn. We read every comment. See you in the next story.